Well, I don't believe I shall ever forget. And I pray God each day that he shall never let me forget that night, and especially the next day. I don't remember where, when, or how the night ended, but I do very vividly recall the next day. I had to be on the job, and I think I took every pill that I could find in the rectory, even all the other good fathers, to get by. I was a very much frightened individual. I believe then it was for the first time that it slowly began to dawn on my conscious thinking that maybe, just maybe, alcohol was my primary problem, and therefore would have first to be solved before all these other real and imaginary problems, which I had always considered much more important and which I had always thought would have first to be solved. As I said, I was frightened, I was nervous, I was jittery, I was sleepless. 2 weeks later, 2 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang. Being awake, I answered it. It was a sick call. I went on the sick call, and I found a man in his bedroom on the floor. I thought he was dead. And I hurriedly prepared to give him the last sacraments as we do in our religion, just as the doctor stooped over and gave him a shot in the arm, and he sat up as live as you and I. And the doctor sort of slyly looked over at me, and he said, "Too much liquor and barbituls." And I thought, the poor fellow. I remember I told his wife, I said, "Well, I can't be a lot of help tonight as a priest. I'll come back later tomorrow when he's feeling better and talk to him." So the next afternoon, I went back to see him. And as I was waiting for him to come downstairs, I happened to look on the mantelpiece, and there was the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, naturally, being interested in anything with an alcoholic label, I took the book down and I started to thumb through it. And as he came downstairs, I said, "Say, what is this Alcoholics Anonymous?" "Oh," he said, "that's a wonderful thing for those who need it." But he said, "I'm a social drinker. I don't need that." Well, I said, "May I take the book home and read it?" He said, "Sure." He was glad to get rid of it. I think his wife had bought it for him. Well, I took the book home and I read it. Oh, immediately I could see a lot of people whom AA would help. As a matter of fact, I thought right away of several of my relatives who should get into AA. But it was not for me, so I put the book aside. The next day, though, curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the book and I read it again. That went on for 3 or 4 weeks. And during those 3 or 4 weeks, I read that book from cover to cover at least 15 or 20 times. I couldn't get away from it, and I couldn't stay with it. As I said, I could see a lot of people whom AA would help, but it was not for me because, after all, I was a Catholic priest. Now, it so happened that the founder of AA in Indiana happened to have been a member of the parish where I was living. And he came to the rectory with some pamphlets about AA to acquaint the priest with the movement. I was interested, and I asked the pastor. I said, "Say, who brought this literature?" "Oh," he said, "that was brought by one of our parishioners, a very high-type individual." He said, "A very fine character." He says, "I think he's some big shot in Alcoholics Anonymous." He said, "I think he's president or somebody." He didn't know much more about it than I did. But I did put that fact into the middle of my revolving brain that was going around at that time at such a terrific pace with all its facts, fancies, foibles, and phobias. And finally, in sheer desperation, 12 years ago, last November, I picked up the phone and I called this gentleman who had brought the literature to the rectory. Well, he only lived a couple of blocks up the street, and I told him on the phone, I said, "You don't know who I am. I'm one of the priests down at the rectory. But I'm wondering now if sometime," now no hurry about this at all, "maybe you could give me a little of your time to talk to me." He said, "I'll be right down." I think he knew more than I thought he did. Well, he got there rather quickly. And getting there so quickly, he caught me unprepared. So I told him about that much of my story. Well, he leaned back in his own inimitable way, and he said, "Well, Father," he said, "I'd suggest you go to a meeting." He said, "You'll learn more from one meeting than you will from me talking to you for days." And I said, "You mean I should go to a meeting?" Now, I said, "Remember, I'm a priest. And if I go to one of these meetings, what will people think to see a Catholic priest walk into a meeting with a bunch of drunks?" Well, he sort of took a pot shot at my ego by replying. He says, "Well, Father, I don't think they'll think much at all." He said, "Matter of fact, I think they'll have enough things their own think much about you." Well, he had me there. My vanity wouldn't let me say no. So I had to say, yes, I'll go. But inside I thought, well, now I'll go as an interested spectator. And who knows, someday I might be able to help these poor devils out. Well, come meeting night, after I had decided not to go at least a dozen or two times, several of the members came by the rectory and I went to the meeting. Well, again, it seems that divine providence had other designs over and above and beyond my own will, because I had hardly sat down in the meeting when this gentleman stood up and he said, "Gentlemen," we didn't have any ladies in those days either. He said, "I want to introduce a new member." And so I was hooked. And I wasn't very happy about it either. But then I was afraid to quit. I thought, well, they know it now. What will they think if I don't go back? But fortunately, the first year I stayed dry and I kept going to the meetings. And as we say in AA, you don't learn AA. AA is not a teaching organization. We say if you stay around AA long enough dry, AA will get you, and you in turn will get AA. And so as the days lengthened into months, and the months into a little over the first year, things began to make sense to me. And the darkness of alcoholism began to give way to the brightness of the peace of mind and serenity that so many know today as members of Alcoholics Anonymous. Life took on new meaning, and life took on real motivation. And tonight, a little over 12 years later, the present Archbishop of Indianapolis not only permits me to own and drive a car, but permits me to drive all the way across the country alone with it. Now, I'm going to try to answer, at this point, a question which I feel is uppermost in many of your minds, particularly in the minds of our good non-alcoholic friends. And that question is, what did I, as a Catholic priest, get from Alcoholics Anonymous? Particularly since the 12 steps of AA are a spiritual way of living, what was there for me, a priest, who had already spent a lifetime in the study of the spiritual life? Well, I got a lot from Alcoholics Anonymous. I was led to admit once and for all that I am an alcoholic. Not that I was an alcoholic. Not that I am an ex-alcoholic. But I am an alcoholic and therefore will remain an alcoholic until the day I die. Which means that even though I be dry 10, 20, 30, 40 years and take one drink, I cannot guarantee my sobriety. That's what makes me different from the so-called normal individual. Although you know something? We in AA sometimes wonder who's whom in this normalcy business. I also learned that outside of the alcoholic problem itself, there's little difference between me and my fellow man. Now, if you don't believe that, you can go to any AA meeting in the country where it is a public meeting, and there you will find many non-alcoholics and many alcoholics. Now, after the meeting breaks up, just try to pick them out. If you can't smell them, you can't tell them. I also learned that being an alcoholic did not necessarily brand me as a moral degenerate. It simply meant that I was a person that could not tolerate alcohol. If I did not take alcohol, then I could adjust to life just as normally, and even more so, if we could use the term, as any so-called normal individual. I learned that I had a sickness of a threefold character, of mind, body, and soul. And I learned that I must adjust on all three levels, morally, or spiritually, mentally, and physically. If I didn't, I might not stay sober. If I did, I not only would remain sober, but I would be happy and have peace of mind and contentment and live in life as Almighty God meant me to live. I also learned that being an alcoholic, I have a peculiar type nervous system, which means that is in relation to alcohol. That means that there are certain types of emotional circumstances that I cannot tolerate for long. If I do, I'm liable to set off again the compulsion to drink over which I might not have control. Those circumstances are such as resentments, self-pity, over-hunger, over-tiredness, and the like. If I permitted myself to indulge in these circumstances of living too frequently or for too prolonged periods of time, I again would automatically set off that craving for alcohol. I also learned that for the rest of my life I would be subject to certain cycles of depression, shakes, nervousness, sleeplessness, and what have you. But I learned that the solution of these cycles would lie in their acceptance and not in fighting against them. I learned that if I fought against these circumstances of my life, that very conflict might set off the craving for alcohol over which I might not have control. I learned further that I would have about 10,000 to 1 better chance of retaining these newfound attitudes and this newfound sobriety by remaining among and with individuals who have the same problem that I have than I ever could hope to have on my own. Recalling to mind, if you will remember, the words of the good psychiatrist at the sanitarium when he told me, "Father, you can, but you won't." You know, we don't know why, but for some unknown reason, the alcoholic personality on the average will not, we don't say he cannot, but he will not continue for long along positive lines of sobriety and thinking and living on his own. He could, but he won't. You know, that's the reason when someone asks me, they say, "Well, Father, couldn't the church keep them sober?" They could, but they won't. Couldn't his family keep him sober? It could, but it won't. We don't know why, but the alcoholic will not continue for long along those lines of living. I also learned that for the rest of my life, sobriety must be my primary concern. Not necessarily my basic interest in life, but my primary concern, which means first. And before everything else, I must avoid that first drink. If I don't, I'm not going to be any good to God, to my friends, to my neighbor, to my family, or to myself. I also learned that no matter what problem might arise in my life, no matter how complicated the circumstances of my life might become, that no problem could become too big, nor could the circumstances become too complicated that I would not be able to solve them without the aid of alcohol. Then, too, I learned that one of the reasons that the good professional men of the past who treat alcoholics, the doctors, the psychiatrists, the clergymen, had so little success with the problem is because they did not approach it on the threefold plane of mind, body, and soul. You know what used to happen in the doctor's office? The alcoholic went to the doctor, and what did the doctor say? The doctor said, "If you don't stop drinking, you're going to die." He knew that. And in order to make his death a little more palatable, he got himself another fifth. What did the psychiatrist say? Psychiatrist would say, "If you don't stop drinking, you're going crazy." He knew that too. And in order to make insanity a little more bearable, he got himself another fifth. What did the clergyman say? "If you don't stop drinking, you're going to hell." He knew that too. And he had been almost there several times. And so to quench a few of the flames, he got himself another fifth. All these good men were trying to frighten the alcoholic into sobriety, where we find that the alcoholic's primary problem is a problem of fear and insecurity. And that's one of the reasons, at least in my opinion, that the Alcoholics Anonymous program works so well. Because through a human being is once again set up a contact of confidence. And through that confidence set up in another alcoholic, the alcoholic again gradually engenders confidence in his fellow man and confidence in God, who is the only ultimate source of security and peace of mind and happiness. You know, a lot of people will ask me, why is it that AA works when these other agencies fail? Well, as I said, first of all, they don't approach the problem on the threefold scale of rehabilitation. We have a saying in AA that only the happy alcoholic will stay sober. If the alcoholic doesn't become happy, he's not going to stay sober. Now, with mental conflict, confusion, moral problems, no one's going to remain happy. Then the group therapy, the establishment of the contact of confidence. One alcoholic helping another alcoholic. After all, that's the whole concept of AA. A group of individuals, each helping the other to achieve and maintain happy sobriety. It's as simple as all that. One alcoholic helping hand in hand and shoulder to shoulder with another alcoholic.